Welcome to Kanopy Conversations, where we dive deep into the stories behind the stories, spotlighting the filmmakers, thinkers, and change makers whose work is streaming now on Kanopy. I'm your host, Christian Pierce. Today, we're diving into a film that's as poetic as it is profound. It's called The Summer Book, directed by Charlie McDowell, and it's based on the beloved novel by Tove Jansson. Set on a serene island in the Gulf of Finland, this film explores grief, growth, and the quiet magic of nature through the eyes of a young girl and her grandmother. It stars Glenn Close, Anders Danielsen Lai, and newcomer Emily Matthews, and it's already making waves for its lyrical storytelling and stunning cinematography. Joining me today is the director himself, Charlie McDowell. Charlie, welcome to Kanopy Conversations.
Thanks for having me.
Before we jump into a conversation about the film, I always like to begin by asking how filmmakers got their start. Kanopy is a streaming platform available to many university students, some of which are about to embark on their own careers. So, if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us how you got your start in this industry?
Yeah, sure. I sort of grew up in a family of people in the industry, so I was very familiar with it as a kid. I spent a lot of time on a set, but of course, as a kid, you sort of view that as just your parents' workplace. So when I was younger, I was, quite bored on set and wasn't really interested in being there. And then, of course, as I got older, I was kicking myself, being like, I was, exposed to like such incredible directors at the time, and I didn't pay attention. I was more interested in what was at craft service, and I essentially grew up on a set and became very familiar with the process of making movies. And it wasn't until I in high school I started to make little short films, and that came from, I was a big surfer, so I spent a lot of time surfing. And at a certain point I thought it would be interesting to film my friends in the water. So I got like a underwater housing for a camera, and I started to make these little like surf movies. And I think that's when I realized I sort of naturally had an eye for framing and a shot, and what was interesting to look at. And so filming surfing, and then that starts to make its way to the beach, and then I'm like, okay, what if you do a little scene before you get into the water? And then I realized that I was essentially making narrative short films. And that was sort of right at the time when like Final Cut Pro was coming out, and all of a sudden, like, you could be on your computer, you could upload footage, and you could cut something and have a movie, 2 hours later. And I think that was an incredible tool for me, because it allowed me to explore, fail, make horrible, horrible movies, realize that there was something interesting in one of them, and sort of move forward with that idea. And that was all before film school, and so I felt like I sort of was able to fail, have tiny little, moments of success before I went to film school. And then film school, I think for me, was where I really got like a true film education through film theory, through, just being on set and sort of trying all different roles. And so I went to Chapman University for undergrad, and then I went to AFI in the directing program for grad school. And sorry, this is a long process from the beginning to the end, but essentially got out of AFI, just wanted to work under any director I knew or could get access to. And so I just shadowed directors, whether it was TV, whether it was a film. And I spent years doing that. And then, picking up little jobs in between. I worked for like a production company, and I was reading and giving notes on things, and, kind of doing anything that I could. And then it wasn't until my late 20s that I got a chance to make my first film. And it wasn't the film I intended to make. There was a different script that I was sort of moving forward with. and and it ended up being something completely different. But the opportunity came from that other project, and it was meeting Mark Duplass and the Duplass brothers, and I think they saw something in me and my sort of drive and what I was wanting to do narratively, and so Mark sort of essentially said to me and Justin, my writing partner, he's like, write something for me and one other actor, and it can be sort of any genre, but contain it to one location, and we'll just go shoot it. And and so we were like, okay, I guess that's what making movies is all about. But it was kind of this amazing experiment to be like, okay, what can we write in this sort of contained parameters that's interesting. And so for me, I actually really, when I go back to film schools and speak to young students, I really preach this idea of, especially for your first thing, and especially for keeping a budget down and essentially just going and making something, keep it small, keep it contained, but make it interesting, have something to say, try to experiment and do something outside the box. The film we made is called The One I Love, and we took it to Sundance. It had this kind of magical little run, and people really responded to it. And that just came from the idea of like taking something very grounded and real, which was a sort of look at a relationship, and then flipping it on its head. And so we sort of did this. There was like a grounded sci-fi element to this film. And so I think people were like, oh, okay, I connect to this sort of a relationship story, but like, whoa, this is cool. I've never seen this before. And so I think that that's something that I would really, encourage people to look at, especially if you have no money and you're like, how am I going to get something off the ground? Is like, find people find actors or actors that are hungry to go make stuff, and just go shoot it, go experiment, go play, and find something that feels personal to you, but also something that's different and has something to say. And that was the kind of best advice that I got from the Duplass brothers, and something that I really encourage today.
I love that story. Every time I ask this, I get a different answer, and that's just a testament to the multiple avenues into film and television. And to hear you, as an early Bruce Brown type, surfer filmmaker, all the
Yeah,
way through, all the way through to your, to your full feature start with the Duplass brothers. It really illustrates again, just keep at it, find your unique voice. To your point, doesn't have to be a complicated film, as long as it's something that gravitates and catches an audience.
yeah.
Speaking of catching an audience, let's jump into the summer book, because this film is visually stunning. The story is so methodical in its presentation, and I definitely want to spend time and learn more about your process with respect to this film. So let's start with the source material, Tove Jansson's novel. What drew you to adapt the summer book for the screen?
Well, I read the novel when I was in my early 20s, and again, on the surface, I think you look at this story and it's about an older woman, a grandmother, and her young granddaughter. So, a male director is not a sort of obvious choice of someone who connects to this material, but I think it goes to the writing of Tove Jansson, and sort of how brilliant she was as an artist and as an author. And for me, I think what I loved about the book and this story is I had never been to this place. I'd never been to Finland. I didn't know what it looked like. And through her writing, she really transports you to this location. And instead of spoon feeding you these sort of ideas or, emotions, I think she allows you as an audience to put yourself in the shoes of these characters. And so for me, it was less, when I read the book, it was less like specific to the characters that I was relating and connecting to, but I sort of saw myself and my family and my relationship with my parents and my grandparents in this story. And I that's rare. I think it's rare to read something like that and sort of the the narrator like allowing you to sort of go into this story instead of just being like it's all about these characters, I'm telling you everything about them, everything you need to know. She doesn't do that. She doesn't like spoon feed you these ideas. And so I always remembered the book, and it's sort of like you said earlier, the film is visually beautiful, and I think for me those visuals were always in my head from when I read it in my early 20s. And then during COVID, while everyone's going through, the height of COVID, everyone's going through fears and am I ever going to see my family again? And I'm lonely and depressed and all these things. I decided to reread the book because I remembered that it transported me somewhere else and I wanted to go somewhere else. And I read it, and then this time it sort of took on a new meaning for me. I felt very connected to the family. I felt very connected to the family story because I was missing my own family. And then I felt incredibly connected and wanting to be in nature. And those were the two things that when I read it this time, I was like, oh, that's when you boil down like a person's life. For me, those are the two things that matter. You could take away all my possessions at the end of the day, but I can't live without my family, and I can't live without the beauty of this planet. And so that sort of set me on this path and adventure to go make the film. I felt like it was something that I wanted to put into the world, and that's also advice that I would give young filmmakers is what do you believe you should put into the world? What do you want to see? What do you want to kind of change someone? And for me, this story, and especially I think the film adaptation, in a world where we are all consumed by everything digital, we are, no matter what, if you're on any social media platform, if you're, I'm in New York right now, if you're walking near Times Square, it is like you're trying to process so much with your brain. And I wanted to make a film, whether people wanted this or not, I wanted to make a film where you had to slow down, where your blood pressure drops, where you have to sort of go into a meditative state, and of course that's a very tricky film to make because I think people are used to every 5 seconds, I want a different thing stimulated. I want it to change. I want it to move forward. And the purpose of this film for me and me telling it as a filmmaker is I wanted to do the opposite of that. I want people to slow down. I want people to drift with their minds into a place of, oh, I remember having that experience with my grandmother when she was alive, and connect to the film in that way. And so, yeah, I think for me, I was so determined and also very scared of how quickly we're moving forward as a society. And so I was so determined to make something that allowed people to sort of disappear from that for 90 minutes. And I think we succeeded in that. I think that the film, really sort of puts you into this lull, and the visuals sort of wash over you in a way that I think is beautiful. And I think, now having played it at festivals and screened it, multiple times, I think there is an audience that wants that, especially in a world that's so screwed up and so confusing and terrifying and all these things. I think this film allows you to sort of disappear into this beautiful place for 90 minutes.
On that note, so this is an adaptation that you again transformed into a film. Can you discuss the visual strategy for this film? Because from the opening credits, as the waves wash across the credits, the titles, the names and everyone associated with the film, and it moves at a pace that again is not hectic, it's calming. Can you discuss how you aligned that with the visual strategies both in editing and in cinematography that impacted the overall look and feel of the film, and how that also is associated with the characters? Because as you follow certain characters, the visuals in the film align with those characters and kind of their state of mind, their age, their, moment as they're, either ending life, beginning life, those types of moments in their personal experience. Would love to hear how that was transferred to the screen via your visual strategy.
Yeah, well, it started. I got to work with Sterla, my cinematographer. We made my second film, The Discovery, together, and he's a very close friend of mine, and so we already have this sort of, you know, connection in many ways together. And so I think it starts with sending images. It's just a painting, a photograph, or a scene from a movie or whatever. And so we sort of start with those ideas, but I think really the visual language was built when Sterla and I lived on the island for 3 weeks before shooting. And the house was being built at the time because we built the house. So during these 3 weeks, like the beginning, we didn't have a house. And then by the end, we could actually do like interiors in the house and kind of pre-shoot these ideas. Um, but it came from observation. It came from experience in this place. We're on an island. We're filming in 22 hours of sunlight in Finland in the summer. So what the light feels like at midnight is so different than anywhere else in the world. And you sort of have this like beautiful magic hour that lasts for, 3 or 4 hours. And so we got to spend time experiencing what it was like there. We got to spend time experiencing what a storm was like there, and what a storm did, which is sort of washed out everything and sort of restarted. And all of a sudden you'd see brand new flowers that would come up and then be gone in 2 weeks, And so this idea that the island is living and breathing became very apparent by spending time there. And I think because we're in a northern country which has very extreme shifts in weather, you feel it. It's not like Los Angeles where it's like Groundhog Day. Every day is the same. It's sunny. There's no distinction of time. Like here, you really feel the changes. And so I sort of looked at the island and a summer there, and for me, it became very representative of the lifespan of a person. You have ups and downs, you have birth, you have death, you have grief, you have joy, you sort of have all these emotions, and you really feel that in this place, and you visually see it in this place. And so this idea, even like you said, the sort of tide coming in and out, the waves, crashing on the shore. I remember sitting there with Sterla, and we were like eating a sandwich, and we're just sitting there in silence, and we're just watching this movement. And then at one point, one of us said like, "Oh, that's the rhythm of a heartbeat." And that's all we had to say. And then all of a sudden, it was like, okay, that's connected for us to grandmother and sort of her experience. And she's probably sat in this same place and watched that, that sort of movement, and felt the same thing. And so we started to connect these visuals and these ideas to characters. And grandmother for me felt like this very stoic, calm presence. And so the camera with her moves in this very fluid, slow, sort of observant way. Whereas Sophia, her granddaughter, is, the world is her oyster. Anything is possible for her. And so the camera moves in a sort of more playful, at times use handheld with her, and more trying to understand her surroundings. And then you have the father who has gone through the loss of his wife, and to me he feels very stuck and very sort of without movement, without energy, and has a hard time getting up and experiencing the day every day. And so he had a lot of kind of locked off camera frames. And so all of that, of course, comes from character and where we find them in this particular moment. But I would say more than any project I've ever done, the actual setting dictated the visuals by either what we were capturing, how what we were capturing and how that connected to character. Like there was some of that in the script, but I would say so much of that came from our time on the island beforehand and just observing, when the swans come in, it's like we experienced all these things beforehand, and so we sort of knew what we wanted to capture when we started production.
It's a beautiful film, and as I said, you can sense the alignment with the characters and their experience as you're watching it, because it again it has such a pace that you get absorbed into the scenery, into the setting, especially to your point. It definitely feels like a character. That island is as important as the three people living on it at any point in time. Speaking of the people, I'd love to talk about you have a veteran actor with Glenn Close and a newcomer with Emily Matthews. Would love to know how you found or brought them to the project, and then ultimately, how did you channel the characters with them, via guidance as a director? Again, juxtaposed with a veteran and someone new to the field. Would love to hear the story, the onset stories with those two individuals, especially.
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, I was such a huge fan of Glenn. I think as is anyone who's seen a performance of hers. She's just so magnetic, and the camera loves her in every way, And I was rewatching a lot of her films, and I rewatched a more recent one called The Wife that she was in, and I was so impressed by how so much of her performance was really on her face without any dialogue. And of course, because we're making this film with little dialogue and this sort of meditative tone, um, I when I rewatched The Wife, I really saw Glenn in this role just because I think she conveyed so much sort of outwardly, and you could feel what she was experiencing inside as well, and that's a really hard thing for an actor to do. I think actors rely a lot on dialogue to sort of express their emotional state as a character, and I think Glenn is brilliant at showing it on her face. And so I immediately saw her in this role, and I wrote her a letter. I didn't know Glenn. I hadn't met Glenn before, but I wrote her a letter explaining why I felt like she was the only person to play this part. And I really believed that. I knew that she didn't live in Hollywood. I knew she wasn't a part of the sort of like Hollywood system. I knew that she lived in Montana, and she would travel and go do a film and then come back to this very grounded place for her. And I just felt like that was this character, and I felt like she would respond to this character even though I hadn't met her yet. And so I wrote her this letter, and we ended up getting on a Zoom, had a lovely time talking, and then she told me on the Zoom, I want to do this. And so it was probably the easiest casting process I've ever had in my career, and also the greatest I could ever ask for, because she is perfect for this part. And then yeah, the girl, the Sophia, was that was a much longer process. The book is of course very famous and popular in Scandinavia and the Nordic countries, and so you had a lot of girls that were auditioning for this part because their parents had read it many generations, and they're very familiar with the material. And so I don't know, I probably watched 1,000 tapes, and went through so many different people and different performances. And I always remembered Emily's. And at this stage, it was just like a 30-second. Um, they were saying a joke. It was like telling a joke, and it was like a 30-second clip. And I remember Emily said her joke, and then afterwards, right after, she goes, "Oh my God, that was so stupid." And it was, I think she was 7 at the time, and to see this 7-year old like be so self-aware that what she had said was stupid or not funny or whatever. No other kid did that. Every other kid just said the joke and was like waiting, for the idea that I would laugh on the other end. But of course, it's kids saying like pretty like, jokes I've heard a million times before. And so I just always remembered that little moment. It felt very natural to me. It felt very real. And I would say the main thing that I knew I wanted was I wanted someone who was very confident in themselves and wasn't trying to overact or put too much onto the character, because one, I knew that that would feel false in it with this specific character. But then two, you have to remember this person's every scene is opposite one of the great actresses of all time, and also one of the most sort of naturalistic actors of all time. Glenn is so real and honest in any character in any moment. And so I knew that I needed someone that was going to have that quality as well, because otherwise you'd have two like very different styles trying to find scenes together. And so anyway, the process went on for quite a long time. I met probably 10 girls in person, one of which was Emily. Then we had another round where it was 5 of them. And so anyway, this process continues on and on. And at the end, it was a gamble. It really was a gamble to go with Emily. She had never acted before. She had never been in front of a camera before. That's terrifying as a director, of course, because you have no idea what's going to happen when you actually put a camera in her face and there's 40 people behind you. And of course, she can do a scene with me and one other person in a room, but that's a very different situation. And but she's a very unique, special, beautiful kid who is so innocent in many ways, like not a sort of young actor, and that she doesn't feel like one. She feels like a little artist, and she sort of felt like who I imagined Tove Jansson was as a kid in a certain way. And so I decided that she was the person, and knowing full well that I may need to really work with her in the moment. And I'd say in the beginning we had to kind of like work at that and find that magic that I had always seen, because the camera's there and it's different. But once she and Glenn started to kind of get into the groove, the two of them became incredibly close. The three of us were like this trio that just like loved and adored each other. And so it just became a very safe space. They got to experiment and feel as safe as they could. And then me as a director, I felt incredibly safe as a director to explore with them. And I think that's just as important as an actor feeling safe is the director feeling, okay, I can I can say anything to these actors because we trust each other so much that we will find what we're looking for. And so yeah, it was just a very beautiful experience with us all working together.
Well, I think ultimately you made the right decisions. The Summer Book is a beautiful film. it lingers on moments, on characters, on scenery in a way I've not seen in a long time, especially in this kind of digitally fast-paced, hectic world. It was such a retreat from that and the kind of, chaos of our time. So, Charlie, I definitely want to thank you for your time today. Enjoyed our conversation, and we are definitely Canopy is so proud to be associated with this film and looking forward to bringing it to our viewers. So, again, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Christian. And yeah, very excited that we partnered with Canopy and can't wait for people to watch it on the platform.
The Summer Book is a quiet triumph, a film that reminds us of the beauty in stillness, the wisdom of age, and the resilience of youth. The film is available on Canopy now without ads or subscriptions for our audiences in the United States and Canada through participating libraries and universities. Until next time, I'm Christian Pierce, and this has been Canopy Conversations. Stay curious, stay inspired, and keep watching great films.